What is the hardest battle in Pokemon is a question fans have been debating pretty much since Pokemon was invented. Is it Red? Is it Cynthia? Or is it something much more obscure? This is a question that I have become determined to answer, so I combed through every game to find the hardest battles in each one, which we're going to go over before determining the hardest battle overall. Actually, we'll be covering the two hardest battles from each game. The reason we're doing two is because I think it makes sense to judge battle facilities under their own section, as the challenge they produce is fundamentally different from the challenge that is produced by normal Pokemon battles. Trying to compare Wallace and Annabelle is really hard because the conditions you face them under are so different, so we will be judging them in different categories. I want to reiterate that when I say hardest, I mean the hardest in the context that they occur. So for example, Whitney or Watson might not be that strong compared to the bosses later in the game, but for the point in the story that they're really challenging because the tools available to us when we face them are pretty limited. Okay, let's start with the Gen 1 Pokemon games, where we have two contenders which are actually the first and last boss we face, Blue and Brock. Blue is undoubtedly the easier to understand of the two. Not only is he the champion and basically the final boss of the game, but he actually sports a very good team even by the standards of other champions. It's well balanced and composed of some of the strongest Pokemon that existed at the time. While the movesets could use some work, especially compared to what we have nowadays, it was a good champion to finish off the game, and it was not easy by any means. As for Brock, I want to highlight how hard he can be, specifically in Yellow. See, in Yellow, your starter Pokemon is Pikachu, whose only attacking moves until level 20 are Thunder Shock, which is not effective against either of Brock's Pokemon, and Quick Attack, which is resisted. This immediately puts you in a tough spot, especially compared to Red and Green, where you can choose Bulbasaur or Squirtle for an easy time. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why not just pick up a Pokemon with a grass or water move, and then you'll be fine? Because they literally don't exist until after Brock. In fact, there are no Pokemon that get super effective moves against Rock until after Brock. Not even Mankey gets one, even though it gets Karate Chop, because Karate Chop is normal in Gen 1. Yo, editing Chris here. So as it turns out, Mankey does learn a fighting type move in this game as it gets low kick. This was a change made for Pokemon Yellow specifically, and when I recorded this, I guess I was just looking at the red, blue, green movesets because I just assumed they were all the same. So there is a solution, but I still think a battle having just one good solution is pretty challenging, especially for the first gym. And his Onix has Bind, which was basically the most broken move in Gen 1 since it prevented you from moving, and it's coming off a base 70 speed stat, which is pretty good for this point in the game. It is a frustratingly hard battle in an otherwise super easy game, and of these two, it definitely took me more attempts to beat Brock just because the tools at your disposal are so much more limited. Like, there's so much more that you can do to make the fight with Blue easy, but with Brock, your only options are to overlevel or get really lucky. So as unintuitive as it seems, I actually think this first gym leader is the hardest fight in Gen 1. And honestly, I feel like Gen 2 is in a pretty similar position. The two battles that I think could qualify as the hardest are Red and Whitney. Red is obviously the hardest just because he has the highest level Pokemon and a team that is fully realized, with pretty good movesets for Gen 2. Whitney is hard because Miltank is crazy strong for that point in the game. It's super bulky and pretty fast by the standards of Gen 2. On top of that, it has a really annoying moveset that makes it hard to break through. It has Attract and Stomp, both of which can disrupt your Pokemon via statuses. Stomp is especially annoying because it's also Stab, meaning it does a lot of damage. It also has the infamous Rollout, which can wind up doing massive damage over the course of its 5 turns, and it has Milk Drink as well to heal itself. But on the other hand, Red's team is also just so good for Gen 2. Aside from Pikachu. Like, he's got the Gen 2 Snorlax, Espeon, and all 3 starters, which all have decent movesets. It's a very formidable team, and it's pretty strong even in the context of a final boss, as the next strongest trainer, Blue, is at max 20 levels weaker than he is. It's a huge jump in levels, and unlike the remakes where you can face an improved Elite Four or rematch gym leaders with higher levels in order to grind easily, you don't have these resources in the original games, making grinding a super tedious task. So I think, with all things considered, Red is the hardest fight in the original Gen 2 games. As for the battle tower in Pokemon Crystal, it doesn't feature any sort of leader figure, and it also isn't that hard, so we won't be talking about it here. As for Ruby and Sapphire, I feel like there aren't a lot of truly hard battles here, at least on paper. The Hoenn region in general is really interesting because the power levels of gym leaders and trainers in general are low compared to other regions, for the most part. Not in terms of levels, but in terms of base stats. Only a handful of trainers have any Pokemon with a base stat total over 500, and even fewer have ones over 550, and only 3 have Pokemon with a base stat total of 600 or above. Which does make sense, as those Pokemon are generally really rare, but it does draw a contrast to other regions, where late game trainers have average base stat totals close to 550. This is unique because enemy trainers aren't the only ones with this trait. The Pokemon available to us, the player, are also fairly underpowered compared to most regions. Now, obviously there are still a lot of really good Pokemon available to us, like our starters Breloom, Milotic, and Salamence, but they're still a lot rarer than they are in other regions. This means that when we compare Hoenn's hardest battles to other regions, a lot of them look easier, but they can still feel challenging because the Pokemon we're using against them are fairly weak, especially in the Gen 3 games. There are 4 battles specifically that I want to highlight. First and most obvious is Steven. He is the champion and one of the few trainers with a pseudo-legendary Pokemon. His team is fairly well balanced for how rock and steel dependent it is. Claydol and Skarmory are immune to the ground type moves that would harass the rest of the team. Claydol also has screens which make it hard to get through other members like Cradily and Metagross. It's a well-built team, all things considered. Next is Norman with his slackings. Do I really need to say more? Those things are menaces. Third is Watson, who can be really tricky, especially if you don't pick Mudkip as your starter. If you do, he's easy as pie. And finally, I want to mention the Route 20 rival battle. I don't know why, but this battle was so hard as a kid. I think part of it is just that it's easy to go into this battle unprepared, but this is more of an honorable mention than anything else, if I'm being honest. Of these 4, I think Steven and Norman are the hardest in Ruby and Sapphire, and in Emerald, I might actually just give this to Norman. The reason is simple. While Super Steven is strong, you also get access to 2 extremely powerful resources at the same time that you can fight him: Groudon and Kyogre. Both are available to catch in the Emerald postgame, and both counter his team super well, which means that I think Super Steven is actually a little bit easier than Champion Steven, since in that fight you only get access to one of the legendaries. So I think in Ruby and Sapphire I'd say it's Steven, and then in Emerald I'd give it to Norman. And while we're on the subject of Emerald, we might as well cover the Battle Frontier too. Here I think there are only 2 options that we can't consider to be the hardest battles: Annabelle and Spencer's Gold Symbol battles, which are the hardest for 2 very different reasons. First, let's start with Annabelle. Annabelle uses a team of Raikou, Latios, and Snorlax, focused on setup. In competitive singles, all 3 of these Pokemon are considered to be OU or Ubers in Gen 3, which means they're very strong for Gen 3, and the movesets she has on them are pretty close to what is the competitive meta. Now, the EVs do need some work, but still, this is a very good team for the standards of a Pokemon NPC. Spencer, on the other hand, is here because his battle facility is complete bullshit. We can all agree on that, right? Just pray you get your Pokemon to do the correct thing, or you lose. So it basically comes down to skill-based difficulty or cheese-based difficulty. And while there are strats that make Spencer easier, I think his battle is harder than Annabelle's just because there is a degree that is out of your control. Next we have Fire Red and Leaf Green, where there is really only one option: the Blue rematch. While Fire Red and Leaf Green do expand on the base games of Red and Blue quite a bit, they don't really add anything challenging like a super boss or secret trainer, so instead our hardest battle is just the blue rematch. To be clear, this is still not an easy battle by any means. The dude has some of the best Pokemon available in Gen 3, and at a pretty high level all things considered, so even though it's just the champion, it's still a challenge for sure. There are no battle facilities in Fire Red and Leaf Green either, unless you count the Trainer Tower, but even that isn't the kind of battle facility we're separating out, so we're moving on to Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. But before we get into that, please consider subscribing. Wait, don't skip ahead. Hear me out. You know how other YouTubers will do that whole only 30% of my audience is subscribed? Y'all, we are at 5%. Only 5% of you guys are subscribed. Do you know how embarrassing that is? All the other YouTubers are gonna laugh at me and think I'm a loser with that kind of ratio. I'll be the butt of every joke. Please subscribe. I'll do anything. I'll face reveal. I'll wear a fursuit. I'll make a really big grape. Just please subscribe so we can get that ratio a little bit better. Now, if you know anything about the Sinnoh region, you would know that there's one pretty significant, pretty notable trainer here whose name has been preserved in the halls of the hardest trainer since their very introduction, youngster Tristan. I'm kidding, we all know it's Cynthia. But is Cynthia actually the hardest trainer in Sinnoh? Well, it's actually not as clear-cut as you may believe. In Diamond and Pearl, the answer is likely yes, but there is a berry battle that has higher levels that is available after you enter the Hall of Fame 20 times. So there is an argument that that is the hardest battle because Cynthia doesn't get a rematch team for Diamond and Pearl, meaning he has a level advantage. But his team is a decent bit weaker than hers is, as it has Pokemon like Floatzel, Rapidash, and Staraptor, whereas she has monsters like Milotic, Lucario, and Garchomp. The movesets she uses are also better than his in general, but they're not amazing, as many of them are super attack focused without much in the way of support. Another interesting factor is just the level that you will face these two at. Going through the Elite Four 20 times will make your team super high level, to the point that you might even be over leveled compared to Barry's team, especially if you use the same 6 Pokemon every time. But when you face Cynthia for the first time, you are likely to be underleveled because the level curve in the Sinnoh Elite Four is so steep. I want to say that Cynthia is harder, especially the first time that you fight her, but I could be wrong because, to be honest, I've never actually done this berry fight because I've never bothered to grind through the Elite Four 20 times. And in Platinum, it only gets harder to determine who is the hardest. In addition to Cynthia and Barry, there are also the gym leader rematches and the partner rematches. I don't think the gym leaders are worth mentioning because they're all monotype trainers, but the partners are a lot more interesting because instead of representing a type, they represent a stat, and as such have much more diverse teams. Mira's team specifically stands out to me. She represents the special attack stat, and as such has a pretty intimidating team with long-term staples like Alakazam, Gengar, and Togekiss appearing on it. The issue with her team though is that it has very little in the way of defense, which makes sense considering its theme, but it does still hold it back a bit. Another fight I think is worth mentioning is the final fight against Cyrus. While Cyrus is fairly weak compared to some of the other trainers we face further on, he is very strong for when we face him. He has a team of 5 Pokemon when the final gym leader only has 4, and his average level is basically the same as Volkner's as well. On top of that, his team has fairly decent type diversity and type coverage. If you don't bring an electric or rock type to this battle, you're probably going to run into some issues, but I still don't think it's quite as hard as something like Cynthia's final rematch. As for the Frontier Brains, there are 2 that I think are worth highlighting: Argenta and Palmer. Argenta is one of those fights that can be hard if you don't prepare properly. Leaving only the types you're weak against for last would put you in a very difficult position against her, but as long as you plan ahead, it shouldn't be too bad. Palmer, on the other hand, just has some really good teams, much like Annabelle. I don't want to spend too much time explaining why these teams are good, so just take a look and you can see for yourself. Next, we have Heart Gold and Soul Silver, where it just has to be red again. While Whitney is still a bit of an issue, she is far less challenging this time because Pokemon movesets have been greatly improved in the remakes. The best example of this is our old friend Heracross. Previously, the best fighting type move it got at this point in the game was Rock Smash via a TM, but now it gets Arm Thrust as a default move early in the game, meaning you now get a stab fighting type move that you didn't in the original Johto games, which obviously makes Whitney much easier. There are also a number of other Pokemon that now get fighting type moves as well, so even if you don't want to use Heracross, you still have other options. Red, on the other hand, is now almost 10 levels higher than he was in the originals, and a lot of his Pokemon have better movesets as well, with Venusaur now having Sleep Powder, Charizard having Flare Blitz, and Pikachu having Volt Tackle and also holding the Light Ball item, which makes its attack and special attack stats better, making it like an actual Pokemon. But the biggest upgrade to Red's difficulty actually comes thanks to the environment. On the new Mount Silver Peak, it is hailing, and in the hail, Blizzard is perfectly accurate and cannot miss. 3 of his Pokemon have a Blizzard now, with it being Stab on Lapras. So yeah, I would consider the remakes to be a pretty big upgrade to Red overall, and simultaneously a downgrade to Whitney. Also, in case you're curious, I did look through all the Gym Leader rematches you can do in this game, and while some of them are strong and formidable, none of them are really compared to Red just because of the level difference between them. Next we have the Unova games. In the original Black and White, I think there are 3 main contenders. First up is Ghetsis. Ghetsis basically acts as the true final boss of the main story. He has a pretty decent team overall, and there's a good chance that you'll be a bit underleveled when you face him based on the levels of the Elite Four. On top of that, his ace is a Hydreigon, which is the pseudo-legendary of this generation, and is so strong in Gen 5 that it was genuinely part of the reason the Fairy type was introduced. Another contender is Alder, who serves as the champion that you face if you rematch the Elite Four after finishing this story. All of his Pokemon are at least level 75, which is high for the Unova region, but the Pokemon he uses aren't all that strong by the standards of Unova. Really, only his Volcarona is a threat, and everything else just leaves a bit to be desired. And finally is Cynthia again. Now listen, I'm not trying to glaze Cynthia in this case, but she genuinely might be the hardest battle in the original Black and White. There are 2 main reasons for this. First of all, she has some of the highest levels of any trainer in the region. The only ones who are at a similar level are Alder, who we already covered, and Morimoto, whose team is far worse. The second reason is the context. There's a big difference between fighting a champion level team in a champion battle and finding one in a random small house in a small town. You could come in here with a half-dead underlevel teamed and get wiped because you don't expect her to be here. It is genuinely the only jump scare in all of Pokemon, and it's pretty effective. It feels weird to say that the hardest battle in this Unova game is just the champion from another region, but I think that really is the case. As for battle facilities, there isn't much to say because it's either Ingo or Emmett depending on if you're doing single or double battles. So I guess in this case I'd probably give it to Emmett just because double battles are more complex than single battles. There is also the multi-battle where you face both bosses, but I think Emmett's super team is still stronger just because Chandelure is better than Archeops in this context. As for the sequels, I feel like it might be N in the post-game or Ghetsis once again. Ghetsis is pretty simple. In addition to having a team of 6 Pokemon, which is pretty strong on its own, he also uses Kyurem Black or White, effectively making the battle a 6v7, which would be hard in general, but the fact that one of them is Kyurem just makes it even harder. N in the post-game is a really unique challenge because his team changes depending on the season, with each season representing a different type of weather. The levels of his Pokemon are also really high, only being rivaled by the champion rematch and Benga or Royale, who both only have 3 Pokemon, so we're not really going to be considering them. While we're on the subject of the champion though, we might as well talk about Iris's rematch team. It's pretty good. Okay, it's not amazing to be honest, but it's not bad either. The issue is just that a lot of her Pokemon have common or overlapping weaknesses. 4 of her Pokemon are weak to ice types, and while Lapras and Aggron help with that, it's hard to ignore such a significant hole. If challenge mode wasn't glitched, I would probably consider her challenge mode rematch team to be the hardest, but with the experience glitch, I'm just not sure it is. On paper, like when you look at it, it definitely is, but in reality, not so much. Honestly, I feel like Black and White 2 have really consistent difficulty throughout their course. There aren't really any that stand out as being overly hard or overly easy, which is a good sign for the game because it means it is well designed, but it also makes it hard to decide which battle is the hardest. I guess I'll just give it to N in this case. As for the Pokemon World Tournament, it's also pretty hard to determine. There is just a lot going on here. There are over 50 trainers, all of which have teams of 6 Pokemon, but only bring 3 or 4 of these Pokemon depending on the format, meaning there are literally millions of potential teams that you can face here. This makes figuring out which of the trainers is potentially the hardest nearly impossible. I think we can say it's probably one of the champions, just because so many of their teams are not centralized around one type, meaning they're not going to be easy to sweep through like many of the gym leaders would be. Beyond that though, I have no idea, and honestly, I don't even know how to approach analyzing this many teams. So let's move on to X and Y. In X and Y, there are, well, very few trainers that could be considered challenging. Like, seriously, I don't even know if I can crown a hardest fight here because literally none of them are hard. I guess it should either be Diantha or our rival rematch against Callum or Serena. They're kind of the only 2 trainers that are hard in any way, but even then, you just get so overleveled over the course of this game that they're not hard at all. I will give it to our rival, since they are the trainer with the highest level Pokemon in the game, but we won't be talking about them again because they are just that weak. As for battle facilities, X and Y has the Battle Mansion, which has 4 new battle brains that you can fight, but honestly, I don't really think any of them are that difficult either. Like, they're not bad, and the super matches you have against them are fairly challenging, but none of them really stand out from the others, you know? Each one represents a different style of battle, so there's one for single, double, triple, and rotation battles. Honestly, I think Morgan, the one for rotation battles, is probably the hardest, just because the rotational aspect adds an extra layer of complexity that most players will not be familiar with. Next, we have Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. To be honest, I don't think Arceus really has that many hard fights either. While it is still harder than X and Y, so much of the difficulty that existed in the original Gen 3 games has been eliminated, simply because of how the games have changed. A lot of Pokemon have much more developed movesets, making former threats like Watson and Norman easier to deal with. And the physical special split also exists in this game as well, which further levels the playing field for a lot of Pokemon. So with these changes inadvertently making the games easier, not to mention Mega Evolution as well, there are only really 2 trainers that I think can pose a challenge: the Steven and Wally rematches. I'm starting to notice a pattern here. Realistically, I think Wally is the better of these 2. Look, I love Steven, but not only is his team a bit weaker than Wally's, but Wally's Pokemon also all have held items, whereas the only held item on Steven's rematch team is his Metagrossite. The items Wally uses are pretty fitting too. It's not random stuff, it's stuff that's still being used in competitive settings to this day, like Rocky Helmet Garchomp. There's also Life Orb Gale Wings Talonflame, and this is before the Gale Wings nerf in Gen 7, so it's got priority Life Orb boosted Brave Birds until it dies. It is a very good team, especially for Gen 6, so in my opinion, this is the hardest battle in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. As for the battle facilities, they're essentially identical to X and Y, so we can just say it's Morgan again. Now we come to the Alola games, where we don't have a hardest battle with a trainer. To be honest, the trainers in this game are pretty mediocre. Where the game really shines is the Totem Pokemon. At least, that's what I would say for the Ultra games. In the originals, I don't think any of the Totem Pokemon or trainers are all that hard from what I remember. I think the hardest would probably have to be Wishy-Washy, just because it's a 620 base stat Pokemon early in the game with a bunch of stats boosted, and is also a water type that we fight in the rain, which is always a bit hard. If we're looking at trainers, I guess it's Kukui in the title defense bout, as he is the trainer with the highest level Pokemon in that fight and the only one with a full team of 6. In the Ultra games, there are 2 Totem Pokemon that I think are worth mentioning, and before we get to the obvious one, I want to talk about Araquanid. Araquanid replaces Wishy-Washy from the original games, and while it is weaker on paper, it has the ability Water Bubble, which not only halves the damage from incoming fire-type moves, but also doubles the damage it deals with water-type moves, which will be boosted in the rain in this fight, and Araquanid will also have boosted stats, meaning it can do massive damage with its water-type moves, which is a lot to go up against for, again, the second Totem Pokemon in the game. And the other is, of course, Ultra Necrozma. Depending on who you ask, Ultra Necrozma is in the running for the de facto hardest fight in all of Pokemon, and people have pretty good reason for saying this. Ultra Necrozma is a disgustingly powerful Pokemon, having the 8th highest base stat total ever, which surpasses that of even God itself. It is a crazy strong Pokemon by default, but we don't get to fight it by default because it also gets a 2x stat multiplier for all of its stats from its aura. It also has a great moveset of Photon Geyser, Smart Strike, Power Gem, and Dragon Pulse, which can hit almost every single Pokemon in the game for neutral damage, with only 38 out of the 700 Pokemon in Sun and Moon resisting all 4 moves. This moveset is also super effective against more than half of the entire Pokedex, and that super effectiveness is boosted even further by its ability Neuroforce, which makes super effective moves 25% stronger. So yeah, just a slightly strong Pokemon and just a slightly hard battle. I had to cheese it the first time I beat it back in the day by toxic stalling it, which I guess does provide a bit of a weak point to the argument that this is the hardest battle. It's just one Pokemon, and you have 6 that you can use to counter it, whereas a trainer will have 5 or 6 Pokemon in one battle. But a trainer isn't going to have a 2x stat multiplier for all of their stats, so I feel like that balances it out a bit. If we do want to talk about the hardest trainers, there are 3 that I think we should really consider: Hau, Kukui once again, and Gladion, specifically in their title defense battles. While all 3 of these guys were opponents you could face in the original Alola games, they're a good bit stronger in the Ultra games, as they all have 6 Pokemon around level 70. This is an improvement from the originals, where only Kukui had 6 Pokemon, and even his highest was only level 65. But I mean, let's be real, are any of these guys really harder than Necrozma? I don't think so. As for battle tree opponents, they're actually incredibly hard to judge. Each special trainer has a roster of 10 to 20 Pokemon they can choose from to use in battle, meaning no battles will be exactly the same, much like the Pokemon World Tournament. Each person also has at least 1 Megastone and 1 Z Crystal holder, so it's not like we can eliminate anyone by looking at their power level or anything. Much like the Pokemon World Tournament, I really cannot think of a good way to determine the hardest battle in the battle tree, so if you have any suggestions or if there's anything I might be missing, please let me know. For now, we're moving on to Sword and Shield. Sword and Shield are by far the Pokemon games that I am the least familiar with, and while I did do a bunch of research into them, I'm still not super confident that I got every single battle. As far as I can tell, there are 3 main contenders for the hardest battle in Sword and Shield: the champion fight against Leon, the final fight against Hop, and the final fight against Mustard. All 3 of them are challenging in the context that you face them in, but I kind of feel like Hop's battle is probably the easiest, just because you can do it in any circumstances and at any level. Still, having a Zacian or Zamazenta is kind of crazy though, so I could be wrong. Leon also isn't all that hard if you know what you're doing, but he does use one of the most broken Gigantamax forms in the game and has a pretty formidable and well-balanced team otherwise, with both a Dragapult and Aegislash, which are quite strong on their own. Mustard also has a well-built team with a strong Gigantamax Urshifu as his ace. All 3 are pretty strong, but I feel like which one is the hardest depends on the game you're playing, because Hop with Crown Zacian would be my bet for the hardest battle, but that variation only exists in Shield. So for Sword, I would probably have to say it's Mustard based on what I know. I just hate that bear, what can I say? In Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, it just has to be Cynthia again. For good reason though in this case, because they really made her difficult on purpose here. Not only does every one of her Pokemon have a useful held item like Leftovers, Expert Belt, or Yachi Berry, they're all EV trained and have 5 perfect IVs. The movesets are greatly improved too, with Milotic now having Recover and Scald, Spiritomb having Will-O-Wisp, and Lucario having Extreme Speed. On top of this, her Garchomp now ties Red's Pikachu as being the highest level Pokemon owned by an NPC, as it now sits at level 88, making her pretty much the strongest non-frontier trainer to ever exist in this iteration. And the same can kind of be said for Legends Arceus, where her ancestor Volo has the same team as her with 2 Garatinas. Obviously, this team did not have the same EVs or IVs or items, but having 2 Garatinas kind of makes up for that. This is honestly a really hard fight to do if you do it blind. Like, a Cynthia team in general is challenging for Pokemon standards, so making it an 8v6 unexpectedly with those 2 other Pokemon being very strong Ghost Dragon types just pushes things over the edge. The only other fight that I think is worth mentioning is the Arcanine fight. This noble Pokemon was probably the the hardest one for me out of all of them, including even Arceus. Although I don't think he's harder than Volo, so this is mostly an honorable mention. Next is Scarlet and Violet, where I feel there's only one option, Kieran. I mean, let's be honest, who else is it going to be? Geeta? Nemona? Don't get me wrong, I love Nemona as a character and as a rival, but her team compared to Kieran's final team just leaves a bit to be desired. Kieran puts together a pretty formidable rain team with competitive staples like Dragonite, Politoed, and Incineroar. Meanwhile, Nemona uses Pawmot. Do I need to say more? The kid's got a good team, what can I say? And finally, we come to Legends ZA. I'm not entirely sure how to judge Legends ZA because the battle mode is just so different from everything we've covered thus far. Like, there are some hard fights in the game, but they're hard to compare to normal Pokemon games. How can we compare getting smacked by Zygarde and getting stomped by Garchomp? You know? Regardless, there were a few that stood out to me, such as Lysander, the battle against Zygarde, and a couple of the Mega Dimension battles as well. But I have to admit, I haven't finished the DLC yet, so it's hard to say if there's anything more challenging in there. It's just so tedious, man. So, those are all the hardest fights throughout Pokemon, and of these, I think we can narrow it down to a top 3. Red in Heart Gold Soul Silver, Cynthia in Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl, and Ultra Necrozma. Of these, I personally struggled with Necrozma the most, but I think that was more just because of the novelty of the fight. Unlike Red or Cynthia, whose teams we've seen at least once before their hardest iteration, we never really saw anything like Ultra Necrozma before it. Sure, there were other totem Pokemon, but none of them were close to this strong, and the concept of a Pokemon boss was still fairly new. So I think part of the reason I struggled with it is just because I was inexperienced with this kind of fight, whereas the struggle with Cynthia in the Sinnoh remakes was because her team was just that strong. I know it's cliche to say that I think Cynthia delivers the hardest fight, and feel free to call me a glazer or a simp or whatever in the comments, but I do think her fight in Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl is the hardest in the series. The game puts you at a deliberate disadvantage against her because all of her Pokemon have near perfect IVs and are fully EV trained. These are two important factors to strength that you probably will not have if you're doing a casual playthrough of the game. You don't even get access to bottle caps to match her IVs until the post game, unless you overlevel a Pokemon with pickup, and then you can technically get them early, but still. Between these aspects and the items she has her Pokemon hold, I just don't see a world where any fight is harder. Maybe Gen 10 will change that, but who knows. As for the hardest battle facility boss, I think it's either Spencer or Annabelle. A large aspect that sets these two apart from the rest is just how much more restricted team building was in Gen 3. Held items were super limited, with many staples not existing. There was no way to manipulate natures easily or IVs. EV training was tedious, as was getting additional good TMs since they were basically only available at the game corner. All of these issues have been improved generation after generation since Gen 3, making those bosses inherently easier because you have more resources at your disposal to prepare for them. Add to this the stupid mechanics of Spencer's battle and the fact you don't even face Annabelle's gold team until a win streak of 70 battles, and I think you can see where I'm coming from. Of these two, I do think Spencer is harder, but Annabelle does have the better team if we remove Spencer's gimmicks. And that's all I've got. I'm sure I missed something, or I'm sure you're going to disagree with me, so let me know why in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Either way, I really do appreciate it, and I should be back within the next week or two for another video.